Well, welcome in, everybody. This is incredible. Man, so exciting for us to be able to share some time with you today. And this is the Church Recording 101 webinar. So if you thought you were getting on here to see Elon Musk make a statement or something, this isn't the right one. This is Church Recording 101. And man, we're super stoked to have you on here. I want to give you a quick overview of kind of what we're going to do today, but just as a little bit of another resource for you guys, if you want to pop over to Jesus Culture YouTube anytime after this, we've just posted a worship interview with Brian and Katie Torwalt. It's really good. A lot of great things that were shared there. And so be sure to check that out at the Jesus Culture YouTube channel. And for this conversation, we're going to get into all kinds of stuff today, y'all. We're going to talk music publishing a little bit. We're going to talk recording. We're going to talk marketing. We're going to talk distribution. All of those things. We're going to touch on them. Obviously, our time is short, so we're going to move pretty darn quick through this. And we will have a recording available that we will email you a link within probably a week or two. We need a little bit of time to get the video kind of put together, but just be looking to your email for that. So if you need to go back and revisit anything, or if you want to share it with someone else on your team that wasn't able to be on today, you can do that. All right. Be sure also to stick around to the end. We're going to have a Q&A time, so you can ask a question. If you have a question that's specific to your church, we'll try to answer some of those at the end. And also, we're going to have a special guest pop on right at the very end. So you want to stick around until we finish. We're going to have someone that's going to pop on and give us a little bit of their story of how their church navigated the music business. So all that said, I want to welcome my two buddies here. Y'all, these guys are amazing. They've got so much experience. Stephen Brewster. Stephen leads up the Harmony Group. They help churches navigate the music business. He also helps coach with leadership and creativity. And Stephen's a church guy too, which I love, man, that you've been on staff with the church. You love the church. So welcome, dude. Good to have you.
Yeah, I'm so excited today.
And Craig Dunnigan, man, Craig and I have known each other. Craig, I was thinking, I've been in music business for about 25 years, and you were in it when I got in it, man. So
Shouldn't have said that.
You must have started when you were 15, but
yeah, absolutely.
Craig leads the 403 Music, and he helps develop songs, recordings, music resources, and he also has a product and marketing. He's a product and marketing consultant for churches, artists, music labels, and nonprofits. But man, Craig is super smart, especially in the publishing end of things, in the business end of things, and we've worked together a lot over the years. So, Craig, welcome, man. Thank you for jumping on.
And thanks to Jesus Culture for putting this together.
Yeah. Well, I'm your host, Jimmy Williams. I work with Jesus Culture Music now. Prior to this, I worked at Capitol for 17 years leading the Worship Together team. And so I worked with a lot of churches and helped a lot of churches navigate this business. So all that to say, today we've got a lot of information, a lot of wealth of information on this panel. And I'm really excited to be able to share with you guys. And our heart at the end of the day is that you would be encouraged, you'd be more equipped leaving this webinar to go and do what God's called you to do in your church and do it in a way that's healthy and it's productive and effective. So guys, let's jump in, man. We don't have a lot of time. I feel like we got a lot to cover. So, I think we just start from the beginning. And Stephen, I'm going to start with you just because we've had this conversation before, but a church is thinking about releasing music. Where do you start? What are some of the things that churches need to be thinking about, asking themselves as they get ready or thinking about doing this?
Yeah. Well, what a great question. I mean, and I think there's probably multiple places you can start. I know that for the teams that we work with, we typically ask them one question, and it's, why do you want to release music? Like, what is the real motivation behind you releasing music? Because the number of conversations you're going to have when you decide to release music, you're going to have to talk to your worship team. You're going to have to talk to your executive pastor. You're going to have to talk to all of the musicians and songwriters who think that they're writing oceans every time they sit down. And so, like, you can write a song and be really, really successful, and that song never gets outside of your zip code,
Wow.
right? So for me, the very first thing is, what are the expectations? Like, how do we clarify the expectations? And then how do we build the discipline to write a lot of songs? Unfortunately, a lot of the churches that we get to interact with, they write 8 songs and want to release 10. And we know that typically all 8 of your songs aren't going to be great. So how are you building a culture that you're starting to tell the story of your church every week in writing sessions with your team, and you're building that culture so that you're getting the really good ones, and then you start doing them in church, and then you find the ones that really connect with your church, and then you're already successful, right?
Wow.
And then maybe they're successful to the level that other churches might want to sing them, and then we're going to record them and try to get them to other places. But if you sing them in your church, that's a huge success already.
Wow, man, that's so good. From what I hear you saying, Stephen, it's ask yourself the hard questions like, why do you want to do this? What's your motivations? And get in there and do the hard work of write a bunch of songs.
Yep.
Man, what's the and you guys experience, Craig, you can weigh in too. Working with artists in churches, what's the most songs that you've ever worked with an artist or a church that they wrote for a particular album, and how many did they end up using?
200
Oh my gosh.
filtered to like 13 or 14.
Wow.
Yeah, I can't beat that.
Well, no, but let's qualify. So, Stephen, keying off of what you said, you have to create a runway, and you have to prove both to your leadership and to the world that you're going to be a source of music and resource they can depend on. So you've got to constantly be building that. If a pastor stopped preparing for sermons and didn't have anything for next week, what would you think of that pastor? So you've got to think, hey, if this music is a discipleship tool to reach our congregation and perhaps others, then we need to be good stewards of it. And we need to queue up a lot of material that's really birthed out of what God's saying here and what he's doing here in our church.
Wow.
And I would say, just to dovetail off of what Craig said, like, if I asked you guys right now, tell me the best sermon you've ever heard, you could probably tell me the title of it. You probably tell me who spoke the sermon, and you may be able to give me like 2 to 3 of the points of that sermon. You definitely couldn't recite it to me word for word. But if I asked you to tell me your favorite song, you can probably give me every lyric, right? And so songs are missionaries. And as a worship team, you're writing songs that are going to go places that your church and your team can never go. And so those songs need to be sonic sermons that come and tell the story of your church. And when they are that, then you're able to get, then it's going to resonate. The world doesn't need another Elevation or Jesus Culture song, but your church needs your song that is your story. Right. And then you're going to have a conversation with your executive pastor, and he's going to be like, this is really expensive. Why? I can't believe this, and we never ask the kids ministry, what's the ROI on diapers and goldfish? Right.
Yeah, right.
But we do ask, what's the ROI on making this music? Because there is the potential of someday revenue being associated with this. Yeah. And someday is probably 7 to 10 years from when you start. But we have to pivot that conversation from, this is a profit generating ministry, to this is a ministry just like kids ministry, just like students, just like outreach. And maybe it's part of the outreach ministry to get the songs places where you don't go. But the motivation, what's the motivation for why you're writing songs and why your church wants you to write songs?
Yeah.
Let me, hey, Jimmy, can I add to that real quick?
Sure.
And I'll make this quick, but we mentioned discipleship, always the right answer, right? Discipling people through music that's inspired by the word of God, from the word of God, from the messages your church is delivering. But then there's what Stephen mentioned is outreach, which is stewarding your mission. It's, hey, we want our music to be an ambassador, like you said, Stephen, a missionary for our community at the very least. And then you may be a church where there's just an incredible deposit of talent, unique gifts. Well, then you're actually expanding the reach of your ministry when you do music. And then lastly, you may get to a point where there's success or there's such fruit that it becomes a bit more of a enterprise, if you will, and unfortunately that can get to that. And there's a lot of things behind that. but it's only when you've been obedient in those baby steps, and those really more foundational steps.
Yeah, man, that's really good. I think, Stephen, you touched a little bit on conversations and just good communication before you jump into this. What are some of those conversations you both can have had experience with this that need to happen before you get too far into this? Like, who needs to be talking to who?
Hey, can I start? Only because I've had a very recent example, and I will never say a name. I will never, draw the direct example. But if a worship pastor calls me and I ask him, "Hey, I believe we should start this with a day together, and I need 2 hours with your senior pastor and your executive pastor," not with him in the room, with the worship pastor in the room. If that person can't get them in the room for, say, at least an hour, then it's a major, like, red flag, at least yellow, but
Mm,
perhaps red flag to me, that there may not be an all-in vision. This may be a church with resource and a person with desire, maybe even great gifts, but they don't necessarily have alignment yet. So I'll actually pause and delay until I can get agreement. And I've had people schedule it and say, "We'll be great," and then they cancel and say, "Nope, we're not." So I don't know if that's helpful, but
No.
I think
yeah,
alignment is a huge issue, if as to, are you ready yet?
yeah. And Stephen, I've worked with churches that, the pastor and the executive team are 100% like they're actually driving the worship,
Mhm.
even maybe more than the creative team is. And then um, I've been, I've helped churches that all the creativity and all the push is coming from the creative team, and the pastors were a little bit more disconnected. The senior pastors were a little more disconnected. How do you kind of bridge that gap between those two and make sure everybody's on board and
Yeah.
everybody's on the same page?
Well, to both of your points, it, someone from senior leadership has to be bought in. So if you're trying to push this rock up the hill and senior leadership is apathetic to you releasing music or disinterested in you releasing music, if they're anything short of passionate about you releasing music, it's not going to work, because you need their support, because it's going to take time, resources, energy away from some other things in order to do it properly and to do it well. So when we're looking at it, when we're talking to a team about working together, very first thing is senior leadership involvement. It doesn't matter who you are. If you don't have that, it's not going to work through your church. Now, you
Mm,
might be amazing. You can go write songs on your own. That's great. But if you're going to do it through your church, you got to have senior leadership first. You have to have a talented worship leader who has a vision and a passion for writing. You have to have someone that can deliver the songs on your team. And it's funny, you have to have a commitment to social media. And you've got to have someone on your team that's going to be willing to, at minimum, project manage, but most likely
mm,
be a social media um, manager for your team, because the the volume of music is so high, and but there are more consumers than there are creators in our space, and so you have to start creating on a level that puts you on par with anyone else, so that you can find the songs that are connecting and that God's breathing on beyond your congregation. So it takes those four elements for a team
Yeah.
in what
And I
we've
and I
learned.
would add, I think that's probably the biggest gap I see in ministries that I work with. They haven't fully staffed or developed the social media plan. They can do it at a basic level, but to really up their game, it's either going to take money or people, and definitely time. So,
yeah.
and there's no substitute for someone on the inside having a heart for the ministry, consistently posting with coaching from someone like Stephen, um, where they're going, "Hey, I need a guide. I'm passionate about the ministry. I can get the message pretty much right, but I need to know what to do."
Yeah. Yeah. And before we jump into a little bit, we'll talk to the next thing we're talking about is songwriting. I think when you're preparing, one of the things you really have to pay attention to is who is involved with the music and who's not, and how is this going to affect your local church team, right? Because typically the way churches operate, there's not, one or two, like these are the leaders, nobody else is involved. Church teams tend to have lots of different people moving in and out, volunteering at different times. And so sometimes a worship brand from a church may be made up of a lot of different people. And then there's people who are serving on Sundays, giving their time, working hard, just like everyone else, that maybe don't get the opportunity to be on the recording. I've seen this create a lot of strife in local church. You guys are snotting. It's like we've all felt that. But maybe Craig, like you could talk a little bit of that. It's just like, how do you pastor through that as a leader, just to be able to say, hey, we had these songs written, we've picked these 5 songs to release. I'm sorry your song didn't get picked this time, or these leaders are going to be on this recording, your time will come, just be patient. Like how does a leader have to pastor
Yeah.
through?
Well, that could be and Stephen's probably thinking, man, this could take forever to go through, but because you never will anticipate every dynamic. But I would say large group settings where you're like, maybe so you're doing a writing seminar or some kind of worship gathering where you're breaking off into writing groups and there's 100 people there, just an extreme example. I think that's the place where you encourage talent, you encourage people to find their gift, use their gift. But ultimately, you're going to discover talent and develop it in smaller groups. So you're always going to find, hey, these are the people that really are gifted, but it had to start in a larger setting. And then ultimately, you're going to be stewarding unique gifts by finding those people who are really strong. And I think it just becomes evident over time, and you've got to really pastor people through the process. In the same way, you're going to have 100 small group leaders in a church, but you're not going to invite every one of those small group leaders to preach a sermon on the platform. And that has to be gently and carefully and pastorally navigated. And I've found that, the wide net approach is a great ministry approach, but probably not the best creative approach. You've got to find ways to identify talent where there's not such a high risk of offense.
Yeah.
So just have to ask the Lord, the Holy Spirit, for wisdom on that, because the wider the net, the more opportunity for hurt. It's a great thing and a great message to share with your church community that you're doing songs and you're encouraging songs, but you ultimately know you're going to get a lot in the vast majority. Just like I said, 200 in a year or year and a half period that ended up being 14 with, 30 to 50 writers that end up whittled down to 10 to 13 that actually contributed.
Right.
So,
yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
I think the who's singing on the song is one thing. I think there's it, and that one's a little more difficult and takes a lot more pastoral touch than which songs we choose, because
True.
Which songs you choose, you can kind of identify if they're working or not. Churches have an A&R person. That A&R person is their congregation, and they get to sing in front of them every single week. And when we talk to a team and they start to tell us, oh, yeah, we're going to release these songs, we're like, well, which ones are working in your church? And they're like, oh, we haven't sang any of these in our church yet. It's like, why? Like Chris Stapleton will sing a song for 3 years before he'll cut it on his record. Why would we not lead our people in these songs that are for our church, that written for them, before we ever put them out? If you want to know if your song's good, put it in between 2 songs that your church loves and see what happens to the room. And that takes a lot of the anecdotal evidence away and gives you some concrete, this is going to work.
2 quick additions to that. One outside producer that Gateway has used had a brilliant idea, and I don't know if he's used it in other places, but there was that, who do we get to sing this? We kind of know who we'd like to sing it, but we know there could be 5 options. He would actually bring 5 people into the studio to sing that. Hey, we just want the best person to carry this. So in doing that, you get to see, can they actually deliver in a studio setting? Are they really the best person to carry this song? You've already had experience. Can they lead it live? And how does it work in the church? But I thought that was a really good idea to find, not only discover where their real talent is, can they hold up under that studio retrack that you're going to have to do in most cases, which is another conversation altogether. But anyway.
Wow. Let's jump to songwriting, man. We could continue on, guys. I know we're leaving a lot on the table here, but I wanted to get into songwriting a little bit and talk about, Stephen, you mentioned just the number of songs. Craig said there was a church that wrote over 200. Talk about, I mean, I know for some people that are probably watching today, songwriting is maybe something they've done on their own. maybe by themselves, or maybe they've maybe written with someone else in their church. And then there's also, I mean, Jesus Culture early on, they weren't writing any of their own songs. They were actually finding songs that were sort of bubbling up out of the church, and they were doing amazing versions of them. And so those early Jesus Culture albums were full of songs from United Pursuit and Chris McClarney and Delirious and John Mark McMillan, writers like that. So, Stephen,
Yep.
maybe talk a little bit about just like writing versus releasing covers, and then maybe even touch on a little bit of like starting to facilitate that songwriting culture that you mentioned a minute ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think writing covers is a beautiful way to work the muscles and practice creating a song that is recorded, right? Like it takes a lot of the pressure away, because now all of a sudden, like, oh, I don't have to worry about writing the song, and if it's good, if I'm singing it, it's good, and now I can learn how to record it and maybe even release it. I think for writing, building a writing culture at your church, what we tell teams is, I remember Jason Ingram one time said, it was like a conference breakout kind of a thing. He's like, I'd like everybody, if you write songs, I want you to raise your hand. Or he said, if you're a songwriter, raise your hand. And of course, like 90% of the room raised their hand. He goes, great, everybody take out your calendar. I'll tell you if you're a songwriter or not. And the truth is, people who write songs wait for inspiration. And that's kind of an amateur way of creating.
Mm.
But songwriters are disciplined, and they show up every week, and they get before the face of the Lord, and they hear what he's saying. And some weeks it may be a bridge. Some weeks it may be one lyric. Some weeks it may be a whole song. So we tell teams, if you're going to be a songwriter, you have to have a minimum of 1 3-hour session every week that you're writing for your church. And then once a month, you're going to workshop all those songs that you wrote together. And then once a quarter, you're going to do like a camp, kind of like a day camp, where you're bringing in maybe other churches, worship teams in your community, maybe volunteers. And that's where you're going to start to really identify who you need to develop, because you might find some hidden talent in those spaces. And then maybe once or twice a year, you're going to go and do like a very sincere writing camp, where you're like maybe writing for a specific purpose, either a sermon series or an event at your church, or an album, or a recording, right? And you might come to Nashville and do that with some of our friends, or you might go to a beach house or a mountain house with the best writers on your team and just craft the stories of your church. But you have to have a plan, and you have to have the discipline to execute the plan.
Mm.
The teams that we've seen lean in and start doing it, they end up writing better songs. The teams that are writing an entire record 2 weeks before the worship night that they plan to record, typically they don't get the best work.
Yeah, that's good. Craig, Stephen mentioned a little bit of writing either amongst your team or even co-writing maybe with people in Nashville. There's churches that do both. I mean, sometimes I love some back in the old days. I think about like, the United Pursuit guys, and like they were just hanging out like in Knoxville, Tennessee. It's like just like this, in the middle of like, kind of the East Tennessee far, they didn't come to Nashville to write songs, but they were creating for their community, and they ended up writing a lot of amazing songs that fit not just their context, but were sung around the world. And then sometimes there's churches that make the decision. It's like, hey, let's put together a trip. Let's come to Nashville and use some relationships and try to do some things there. What do you advise churches when they're first starting out? Is it important or imperative that they come to Nashville?
You know what? I would say in order for that to be fruitful, and Jimmy, you know this better than any of us on this camera right now, you've got to be ready for that environment. And I say how you get ready is some of the things Stephen mentioned. But the thing I've always done with songwriters, and like you said, I've been a publisher for over 20 years. When I ask a writer, when I hear the potential in an idea or a song start, when it's really inspired, I usually ask them, tell me where this came from, why this idea has come, to this room right now. And almost always it's because they had a unique word or encounter with the Lord in their own time with the Lord. So I would say the discipline of writing is most important, just from a stewardship and obedience standpoint. But then secondly, is going to the well, which is both the word of God and the presence of God. That goes for worship leaders as well, as we always talk about, but we don't think as much about that with songwriters. Real writers get inspired by discipline as well. But that discipline will only be meaningful if it's coming from a sincere place. And frankly, the experiences of other people that in your congregation should inspire the songs you write. Meaning, hey, God's doing something here, or I've seen him do something. That should inspire praise in that writing room. It should inspire words of thanksgiving. If you're desperate for God to do something in your congregation, that should come out in your songs or in your community. Let's say your community is really going through difficulties economically or whatever. That should affect your songs. We don't need to just write homogenized marketplace songs. We need songs that are birthed out of God, we need you, and you're the only one that has the answers because you're great and glorious.
That's so good, man. I did everybody on this call, if you know what CCLI is, you probably know it from the church side, but they license churches to sing songs, and then they collect that money and they divvy that money out to publishers and writers. And they publish a report every 6 months that shows these are the top songs that were sung, in different areas of the world over the last 6 months. A few years back, I took the time to do a real deep dive on the top 100 songs that were sung in churches. And I started asking questions like, where were these songs written? Who was in the room? What was the context? And tried to sort of put songs into buckets. And this will encourage everybody on the call that's not in Nashville right now. But you guys, this was shocking to me. Of the songs on that top 100 at the time, only 2 of those were actually started in a writing room in Nashville. All the others were started, at least they were started, or a lot of them were completely written in places like Atlanta and Charlotte, North Carolina, and Reading and Sydney, Australia. And what it told me at the time was, and there's no doubt there's a lot of talent in Nashville in the writing circles and certainly production as well. But the nut of your song, that really special thing, Craig, you were talking about, just that, what's that thing that the church needs to hear right now? So often those are coming directly from a local church, from a pastor's message, from someone's life who's going through something. And that's what makes those really, really special songs, the waymakers of the world, that sort of just take over a little bit, and they're so different and fresh, is because they were birthed out of a local ministry context. So I think that could be an encouragement to everyone who doesn't know anybody in Nashville. And I don't think I'm ready to come to Nashville. You're probably, where you're sitting right now, writing with your church team, is probably the best thing you could possibly be doing from a creative standpoint.
And you've really made it if someone from Nashville called and said, I want to come to your ministry and write with you.
That's right.
It's probably a great call to get someone to come and be in your house.
100%. 100%. So just the practical parts of co-writing, because I've heard this came up before. Like, Stephen, how do writers determine splits? Like, they're in the room, there's 3 people working on a song. Who determines like what percentage of that song was written by who, and how does that work?
Yeah. So all of it goes to Craig Dunnigan and Jimmy Williams. So just sign it all over at the very top.
Yeah, I wish I had credit on some of the songs I've co-written.
Yeah, right.
Songwriting is complicated. Publishing is complicated. We could do a whole series on publishing, and you guys are both ridiculously more intelligent around publishing than I could ever hope to be. But in the most elementary form possible, like, you think of a song as 2 halves. Each half equals 100% because we let creative people do math. And one side is publishing, the other side is writing. With that basis, think about, there's a spectrum, and on the end of each end of the spectrum is the polar opposites. So one end of the spectrum would be the church owns all the publishing and all the writers share. Okay. And that's about 20% of the churches we work with live on that end of the spectrum. On the complete other end of the spectrum is the church says, hey, you're a psalmist. We're going to just gift you the writer share and the publishing share. In all my years of doing this, there's only been 2 churches that lived on that end of the spectrum, right? In the very middle, the church owns all the publishing, the writer retains the writer share, okay? Because it's a spectrum, your church can live anywhere it wants to live on that spectrum. There's not a wrong way to do it, right? And I think that's one of the very early conversations we have with teams and their leadership, because the worship leader can't make that decision in a vacuum, because they're going to live on the far right of the spectrum where they get the writers and the publishers share. And then one day the executive pastor is going to go, why are we giving you all the money and we're putting up all the money? You know? And so that's with that as the basis, you know, in Nashville, the way that most rooms work are, if there's 4 people in the room, everybody takes a quarter. Now there are other entities that are like, well, we split it a little more finite than that. And that's fine. It's not a wrong way to do it. But at that point, you're probably splitting pennies. So is it worth it? And are you really like honoring each other in a way that, for where most of the people listening today and where they're starting, it probably just makes most sense that, hey, we're going to split this evenly amongst everybody, because we're talking about the difference between like a large Happy Meal or a medium Happy Meal. You know?
That's right.
At least initially, right?
But we can make tens of 20s of dollars.
Right, exactly. But let's get into the right disciplines and the right habits so that we've set a precedent, and we would have each of our teams do single song agreements with all their writers, where the church owns the publishing or owns whatever part is going to administrate the publishing. And then all of that goes back to the church. And then it just, you want to make it clean, and you want to make it clean and clear early, because, you know, clearness is kindness. So let's be as clear as possible at the very beginning, so that there's no questions, because some of you are going to write the next Oceans. And when you do, you don't want to clean that up on the back end. You want to clean that up on the front end.
Word.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered that question well for you.
No, that's really good. Well. And, you know, I always tell writers too, you know, you could get into the weeds with this sort of thing and get really persnickety about it. And the music business overall, it's very relational, you know, and everybody wants to build relationships, and there's give and take. Sometimes you're going to contribute more, someone else is going to contribute more, but it's based on relationship. And, you know, I've seen it go both ways. I've seen people be really generous. You know, somebody comes in, gives a really great one line of the song that makes it all come together, and they take an equal share of the song. And then I've seen times where people want to parse it out, you know, a percentage at a time, and it really kind of spoils the pot for everyone. And they just don't feel great about getting back together and working again. So I would say just default is to be really generous with one another and have that communication up front. And, you know, Craig, at what point when you're writing or you're releasing music, do you need to have a publisher involved? Stephen mentioned publishers having a piece of the income. You know, when the writer writes a song, they own it 100%. You know, it's all theirs until they decide that they want to bring a partner in. At what point do you think it's necessary for them to consider either an administrator, someone to help license and collect royalties, or someone that's a publisher to help commercially exploit the song?
Well, maybe a misperception is if you ask someone, hey, are you a published songwriter? What they're going to imagine is, have I signed the song to a publisher? Which is kind of the perception of that word. It really means, have you publicly distributed or promoted your music? Like, has it been available? So honestly, most people are publishers and they don't even know it, because they own their copyright. They own their song from the moment they create it. And then if a church, like Stephen says, has set in place kind of a foundation, hey, this is how we relate to songwriters. And we've, as he said, communicated it clearly, compassionately. I always say where comfort for the creative meets protection for the church is the right answer. Like finding that balance in that spectrum. But as far as when you need outside help, everyone's going to need at least an administrator, someone that can collect the royalties that do flow in. They may be small, and they will likely be small on the front end. It's unusual for them not to be small. However, you need to steward what you have, collect what's available, and there's indie options. I have to say, there's limited great, like robust indie admin for churches, unless you're working with a Stephen or a me, or, you know, some situation like that. it's hard to find something that really can cover all the bases for church music. But you can do the basics of collecting performing rights organization monies, which is performance income, mechanicals from streaming. That's pretty easy to get through a variety of methods, and you can get a basic administration set up. But if things are really going for your ministry consistently, you're going to grow, you're committing significant resources, you at least need an administrator. The only time you would need a publisher is when you're in a more escalated partnership with, say, an industry entity that's going to support you in a variety of ways. And that comes maybe in time. It won't come for everyone, and it's not right for everyone. And really, the companies, let's just say in Nashville, they only want to own a piece if something significant's happening. There's no reason for them to own everything you do. It puts a lot of pressure on them and a lot of pressure on you. I think most of the time it's administration that works itself into partnership in a different way once something actually starts working.
Yeah. Well, let's transition a little bit into recording. I know we could park there, as Steve said, all day long. But this is a little bit of a bridge question, because I hear songwriters a lot of times they're very, very afraid that someone's going to take their song, right? You'll hear, I'll ask a writer, is like, are you sharing your music, on YouTube or Instagram, and they're like, oh man, I'm just afraid somebody will take my song and they won't, it'll be gone and things like that. Stephen, what would you say to that, as far as using those platforms, even maybe it's a finished recording, maybe as you're even developing songs, being able to share those with an audience and get feedback early on? This may be more for like an independent artist, but certainly churches would do it as well.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's just for an independent artist anymore. I think if you're going to release music, so think about music this way. So DSPs, what we would call DSPs, that's like Spotify, Apple, Amazon, they're the store. Okay. And your song is a toothbrush. You can get the best placement in all of the stores. If no one's going to buy your store, going into the store to buy your toothbrush, you're not going to sell any toothbrushes, right? So social media is the ignition that fires off all of the marketing. Okay. And so if you don't have an adequate social media plan that's very disciplined, it's going to be very hard for your music to get heard, because the store is just where they're going. And there was a season we did it actually in a brick and mortar store. Like we used to all fight over who got the end cap at Mardell's, right? Now, then we went into a season where we would go in and fight over who got the playlist, who got added to New Music Friday or Worship Now playlist. Well, ultimately, if your music is succeeding, you're getting more streams because people are going to search for it than people are finding it. And ideally, you'd love that to be like a 50-50 ratio, right? You'd like half of it to be discovery through the platforms, and then half of it audience. I call them friends, not fans, because this is worship music. So if we're making fans, a totally different problem. But as a fan, as a friend, you're trying to get other friends to hear your music, right? And so we encourage teams to start teasing the songs as early as they're comfortable. And that's 6, 8, 12 weeks before it's ever going to be released. And it's not tease it of like, this is my new song, get ready to go listen to it, and you have the release date on it. It's ministry content of them doing that song in some facet.
Yeah.
And when they're doing that, then all of a sudden it's allowing people to get connected to it. And then we go, oh my gosh, we released this song and we all thought that this was the song everybody was going to love. And this is the one that everyone shares and listens and saves.
Yeah.
That should be how we build our plan.
Yeah.
And so the idea of people stealing your song, you can only hope that actually happens.
You're on the right track if they're trying to steal.
Let's hope someone steals your song. Let's cross that bridge when we come to it. But that's like saying, man, I don't know if I want to go to the NBA because I don't have my outfit picked out for the Hall of Fame yet.
Yeah, right.
Right? Like, okay, well, we can probably figure that out later. But right now, you got to go shoot some jump shots.
Yeah. I remember the first time that I saw How He Loves or heard the song, it was John Mark McMillan was leading worship at a prayer event in Nashville.
Yes, I remember.
And they were tracking and just doing video. It was really rough, and he was telling a story, cried through the whole thing. but the song and the performance was real and it was passionate, and it just started getting passed around. Like everybody's like watching it, sharing it. Obviously at some point Jesus Culture, discovered it. Kim Walker did a massive version of it. The song like skyrocketed, and it was years before John Mark even had a version of the song out. It was like other people were singing it and recording it, but he it was out on, just a social media platform and a not great recording, but it was real and it was raw and people really connected with it. And so it's just a great example of how sometimes, it's just instant market feedback. You put a song out, hey, it's something I just wrote, like, tell me what you guys think about it, and be ready for the brutal comments. But you may find that people like it. So,
Yep.
Yeah. Can I add something to the
sure.
testing or the vetting of songs? That is one advantage a church that has multiple campuses or multiple expressions has. They can actually bring songs into a lot of environments. But you can create your own environments to test those songs. You can find ways to bring them in to your congregation early. And so I would say you should not record a song that hasn't proven itself in your own church. That was said early on, but I echo that and affirm it in a big way, because otherwise, what are you doing? I mean, you're filling slots, and there's no reason in the modern music industry to fill slots. Like, there's no need to feel like you have to get to a certain number of songs on a recording. If you've got one amazing song and four in the queue, record the one and release it, but have the other three ready,
Which brings up a whole nother thing. Like churches, senior pastors love albums.
Sorry, I'm gonna
They
mute.
love albums. They love them. They like, you would think that they are the box set collectors. No one else that's listening to music anywhere listens to a whole album anymore.
We're making
Like,
a special deal edition vinyl just for you.
yeah, give them all the songs on a Dropbox and let them live their best life. But like, even with Elevation, the last album we did was 8 songs, right? Like, if you have these 10 songs that are gifts to your church and you release all of them at one time, no one is going to listen to songs 6 through 10, and very few people are going to listen to songs 4 to 6. But what if you took those 10 songs and stretched them out over the course of 12 months? And literally, one of my favorite people that we work with, we recorded an album last February, and it was 14 songs. And the pastor was like, when can we get this out? And I'm like, you're going to hate me and you'll probably fire me, but here's how we want to do it. We want to release this single, then an EP, and then come back in January and do another single, and then release the whole thing together as a deluxe. And begrudgingly, he got on board, and it's been massively successful for them in their space. But it took us a whole year to release the album.
Wow.
So to Craig's point, if you have one good song, get it out and build consistency. Like, start releasing music frequently, because that's going to help you with visibility and algorithms and all that other stuff. Yeah. But please don't do an album.
Yeah.
Right. And two quick things. The number one marketing tool is consistency. Of course, quality of content is almost goes without saying, but then find ways to engage your network, your people, your church in those songs. I mean, there's no substitute for that. If you're in a network of churches, share it with those folks.
That's the big thing that I've noticed, even, with Jesus Culture, and just trying to rethink, how to release music. And, you put out an album, and, you put a lot of time, and you usually spend a lot of money getting the album out. And then, you get into 6-8 months later and you need something else to talk about. There needs to be either a new version. So you end up spending more money doing a new version of a song, versus if you can spread it out. And as you said, Stephen, like releasing music consistently, Craig, over a period of time. I even think about, especially the genre that we're talking about. I mean, with worship music, I would have been involved with worship in my church for 25 years. And, like whenever we look for songs for Sunday, we don't say, hey, I need 5 new songs to play this Sunday. It's like, I need a song. I need a song for Easter. I need a song for, to introduce, in May, June. And that's what worship pastors are going after, one song. And so the bigger splash that you can make around one song, it just helps all the way around. and from a cost standpoint, we're getting a little bit into like release strategy and stuff as well right now. But, the last time, and Craig and Steve, you guys may have a better number. Spotify was like 1 million streams of Spotify was paying around $4,500, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Is that
That's
close?
generous, probably.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And, you know, you, there's going to be pieces of that. Like if you use a distributor or whatever, they're going to take a percentage. If you got other people, partners involved, they'll take percentages. But it gives you an idea of like, if you do a whole album and, even if you only spend, a couple thousand, $3,000 a song, I mean, that's a lot of money to try to recoup, you know. At the same time, I feel am way more confident doing one song and believing that I can actually pay for that song because it's a great song. We're putting it out, we're putting the effort behind it, than I can 10 songs or 12 songs on an album where I know, as you said, Stephen, the back half of that album may have great songs. Nobody's ever going to pay attention to it because nobody listens to whole albums anymore.
Yeah. If a song matters, it should have its own moment. It's my philosophy.
Yeah. Well, let's back up just a second. I want to make sure we get some of these things into our time before we jump into our Q&A. You guys be thinking about, we're already getting Q&A questions rolling in. So be thinking about maybe some things to ask this group. But producer wise, Craig, like, how do you know whether you need a producer, whether you need to hire someone, or whether you can actually do it in-house as a church?
Oh, man. I think one indication is that get an outside voice or outside perspective on that. The prime example I can think of is just being in the room of a church and hearing the way they've arranged their own songs, perhaps even arranged other like covers. There are some church players that can handle playing parts they've heard, but few can come up with elegant, amazingly crafted parts like we all love and know when we hear, great recordings. So there are some churches that have incredible talent resident and they should do it. I would say most probably on the front end need outside help. But if you have budding talent in the area of production, you can create other types of settings like acoustic recordings that give your internal producers a chance. So I'm not saying you should never use internal production, but in most smaller churches, let's say, and I'm saying a small church is still a mega church, 2,000 to 3,000. It's not likely you're going to have an extremely capable producer in-house yet. But there are things you can do to get there, and you can probably learn a lot by enlisting some outside support. And you mentioned the number 2,000 to 3,000. That's probably a good number for an independent church or artist to spend, at the beginning on creating a great master. That doesn't include a video, but a great master.
Yeah. Stephen, would that be you think, could you do a track for $2,500 with a producer? And then do you pay them? Did they get percentages of like a percentage point or two on the tracks? Like, what have you had in your experience?
Yeah, we try to never do like producer royalty on the tracks, just because most churches aren't set up for the type of accounting that requires. And we want that sweet lady who works in accounting to not lose her salvation. So let's make it as simple as possible for her. But so we typically don't do points. I think, 2,000 plus mix and master is probably in that zone. And then it's worth an extra $500 to not pay a producer royalty.
Yeah. And what is that? Walk through like what that producer is going to do. Let's say the church runs a song on Sunday. They love it. They've got it refined down. Maybe they're grabbing a board mix from Sunday morning as sort of the roadmap of how we're going to do this. Maybe they've got some parts that they've already recorded in church that they want to use. What's that producer going to do to get that song from that point to actually getting ready to send off for a mix?
Yeah. So, I mean, hopefully they're going to come in and hear your song and then help you maybe tweak the parts or the arrangements a little bit to get it to something that maybe some ideas that you hadn't thought of. And as an artist, you have to push back on those if they don't feel like they resonate with your church or your artistry. And then they're going to help record the song. They're going to make sure that they help with the capture, and then they're going to help with overdubs, so fixing the most of our people listening have no errors when they record a song, but
That's right.
some churches actually do. And so they'll go in and do any fixes. And it's interesting. Some churches go very heavy on the fixes and some go really light on the fixes. I was working with one church and they had a producer and he was like, well, it's going to take all these fixes. And they were like, well, we talked to somebody at this other church and they didn't do any fixes. And he's like, I can't believe that that's true. But so it's somewhere in between the two.
Right.
But they're going to help with the fixes. Then they're going to usually get it to a master, a mix engineer that they like to work with. They're going to help you dial in that mix. And then they're going to get it to a mastering engineer and help you dial in that master. And then you've got it. And it's your turn to step up and start the plans around releasing.
So that mix is going to cost you what, maybe $300 to $400, somewhere in that range.
It depends on who you go to.
Okay.
So I would say it's anywhere from $300 to $1,500.
Wow.
Depending on who you're choosing to mix, and there's so many different things now, like Amazon and Apple they're not completely requiring it, but they're definitely pushing on teams to release in Atmos and in spatial. And so that's an additional cost. And so I would say budget $1,000. And if you come in under, then you get to have a pizza party.
That's right. That's good. And mastering, Craig, like what's the sonic difference between a post mix album? So you got the song produced, you send it off to mix, you get the mix back, you've approved it, you love the way it sounds. At that point, what's the mastering going to do for you?
I'm not sure I'm the expert to address the technicalities of it, but I do know that it, especially as across different releases, you want some consistency in your sound, and it takes out the extremes. It's definitely the polish that you need on a mix. And I have sat in mastering rooms and seen what they do, and it's just such a specific skill. And there's just a difference. And so I can't address it from the technical side, but I can say you definitely need to master after you mix.
Yeah. So leveling, EQing a little bit, all of that. Yeah. I don't know exactly what they do either. I just know I get it back and I'm like, wow, that sounds
I call
really
it
good.
auto magical. It's auto magical.
That's good. All right, let's touch. We just got a little bit of time left, and I think we ought to use this on release strategy because I think probably that's where most churches are trying to figure out. We've touched a little bit on, utilizing socials. We talked a little bit about the playlisting that. Let's talk a little bit about, we touched on format, but maybe talk platforms a little bit. Stephen, maybe start with you. Like, when you use, if a church is using, just a distribution platform to load their music up, where all is that music going and where's it not going that they need to think about?
Yeah, great question. So it's going to go to all the primary digital service providers, DSPs. So when you go into a Ditto or a DistroKid or a TuneCore, it's going to allow you to check all stores or select stores. You're going to go in and get it. You want it to go to as many places as possible, right? Additionally, in our new world, it's going to go to TikTok, Instagram, other places where you can use the sound. And so they're going to start to service it to those places as well. And then with all three platforms, you can allow it to create a YouTube ID, content ID, that will then collect revenue against your YouTube uses as well. And so on the master side. And so one thing to be super clear on is there is a publishing side of what we do, and then there is a master side of what we do. And both of those generate revenue. And so you get when you get your DistroKid report or your TuneCore report, if you didn't select to have them admin those songs on the publishing side, that's all master revenue. Typically, none of that's going to go back to the singers. It's all going to go back to the church. And it's interesting because the church is the label and the artist. Whereas if I'm just in my bedroom releasing music. I'm just an artist, you know. But because the church is funding this and all that, they actually act as the label and the artist. So they're all good. They all have different strengths, different weaknesses. It's going to get your music to everywhere it needs to go. TuneCore has a little bit more customer service than DistroKid does. DistroKid's a little bit like whispering into the wind to see if someone's
You're right.
And then we've been using Ditto on some newer teams that we work with, and we've had a really, really great experience with them.
Hey, can I add something to that? I think people don't maybe they know it intuitively, but they don't say it out loud. YouTube is probably the #1 song discovery platform for music. A lot of people discover music there, and then they'll go, after they love the song and have experienced it, they'll go listen on the DSPs like Spotify. So really you can add to the two that Stephen mentioned: song revenue, master recording revenue, the channel revenue itself, which is a whole nother subject. But just be aware, over time, if your church really creates an incredible following, or friends, as Stephen calls it, on YouTube, there is a revenue potential there. And a lot of times covers can generate good activity on YouTube. That's a great way to also start. If your church is ramping up to release music, YouTube's a good place to start with covers and maybe specific versions of songs that aren't ready yet, or you haven't created the definitive, but you can create series of videos to start whetting people's appetite for your music on YouTube. But of course, quality is always an issue there.
And I would say that also plays into social strategy. Like as you're building your social following, doing your version of a popular worship song that works for your church can also help grow the reach of your platform. And you're not growing your platform because you're trying to be an influencer or you're trying to have more followers. But if you can talk to 10 people on this release and 100 people on the next release, it just gives you a better chance for more people to be ministered to by those songs.
That's good. And on the YouTube, I mean, obviously YouTube platform, it's a video-based platform, but if you don't have good capabilities as a church, you could take still photos, create basically something that's just lay the music behind it and do like a slideshow type of thing, put the album cover up there. There's ways you can kind of work around, at least being able to get it up onto YouTube where it's super, like you can share it with, it's easy to pass around. People can share it with friends. And so don't feel like you have to have like, your church has to have amazing video quality. There's workarounds for that to be able to at least hit those platforms with the music.
Yeah.
That's great. Talk about individual artists featured or just church featured. It's a landmine, I know. But like, so if your church is releasing music, maybe Craig, you can start there. Like, is the artist going to be the church, or is it going to be the church and whoever that leader is on that particular song?
Again, we probably going to talk to this at the very beginning, but a big part of what I go through with churches I work with is calling, and what are they really called to do and create over time? Because literally there are some churches where they might have existed and done music and recordings because there's one person that needed their song or their voice heard. So they may not know that on the front end, and that a really perceptive senior pastor or worship pastor that knows, hey, we are here to cultivate talent and really perhaps even launch individuals into their ministry. That's a decision you need to make as early as you can discern it. So literally yesterday, I'm on the phone with this church that I'm super excited about their music, but I'm asking them as we're finishing up, getting the first single ready. Okay, this is a big discussion, but do you want to put this person's name as a co-primary artist on this single? So when co-primary means it's going to show up as X church and, John Johnson. So which means John Johnson is now going to have a Spotify profile that's going to be auto-generated and it's going to start building listeners, hopefully. So that's a decision to be made. It's a little easier for churches to say, no, we don't want them to be a primary artist. We haven't made that decision, but we'll put them as a featuring credit so that people know who's singing the song. Maybe at least for their church and their community to know, but perhaps for others to discover the talent, that they love from their church. So there's the co-primary, which means you're actually co-releasing music with an individual, whether they know it or not. And then there's the featuring, which does show up in searches when you're going back to look for that person. But it's a way just to give some acknowledgement to who's carrying this song in the ministry.
Yeah. And that shows up just in the title of the song. Usually
Right, yeah.
the title of the song, and then it's got featuring and whatever that artist's name is on the back end of it. That's good. Let's transition. I tell you what, I just got a note. We've got a special guest, Stephen, and they have a hard out at a certain time. And so I'm gonna flip the Q&A to the end, because I know I want our people to be able to hear. We thought, just to our audience, we thought when we were putting this together, wouldn't it be great if we had like a real life example of a church that went through a lot of the things that you guys are starting to contemplate as churches and has navigated that, and to be able to hear directly from them what they found was hard, what they found was successful, easy, and how they found success. And so, Stephen, I'll turn it over to you to make the introductions. And yeah, man, stoked.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to introduce you guys to my friend Tyler Roberts from Red Rocks Worship. And Tyler is a phenomenal singer and songwriter and worship leader. He's an even better dad, husband, and friend. And he leads the worship team and the music creation and releasing that happens all through Red Rocks Church. So excited to have him here with us. I don't see him, but I think he's here.
I'm coming. Just trying to get this video started, my dude.
You got it, my guy. I believe in you.
It keeps saying unable to start videos. So
I think Britt might have to set that.
Britt's on it because she's the best. She's the absolute best. She
So
was waiting on me.
We'll start talking to you. Now, Ty and the Red Rocks team, they're actually doing a ministry event at a conference today. So that's where he has to run off to when he leaves. But Ty, just give us a little quick snapshot. How did you guys start writing music? I love when you tell the story, but when you were starting to write music, original music for your church, how did that happen?
Well, truthfully, we started writing songs for our church because we were one church, one campus, and then we became a multi-site. And the other worship leaders and we just couldn't agree on what songs we should sing across the board. We had very, very different backgrounds. Sorry, I'm trying to get this video up. We had very, very different backgrounds, very, very different ideas of what we thought, which worship songs were the best and whatever. Okay, 1 second. Confirm. Guys, we've been doing this since 2020. This shouldn't be a problem. Literally should not be a problem. I'm so sorry. You could see my face right now, but you can't. It would be super red.
That's hilarious.
Oh my gosh. Why? Okay, well, let me just tell you, we couldn't agree on the songs. And so what we decided was, you know what, if we got together on Friday mornings and prayed, and then we wrote songs together, then surely if God gave us something that we all wrote together, there would be something that we could agree on that would, work at both campuses. And so, sure, that's exactly what happened. We wrote a song called Fill This Place. Back in like 2013-ish. Now it's going to work. Maybe. I said, can you see me?
Bro, you're there.
Yes, we got you.
God is good and he is faithful. Amen. Thank you, Britt. And so is Britt. You should have seen me. I'm trying to text him like, I don't know. I'm so sorry. Anyways, yes, I am here at a Hyatt Place hotel diner area. That's what I'm sitting in. So I'm sorry if it sounds like a trash can. Anyways, we wrote the song Fill This Place and we started singing it at, our main campus, our Golden campus. We started singing it at our Littleton campus. And then, anyways, we're like, well, this thing's working and we're actually agreeing and we're unified. Let's go. Praise God. And so what we started doing then, we kept writing and kept writing and kept writing. Okay. Anyways, we had written a few more songs. We tried them at church. We felt good about them, but I don't know if anybody on the outside of our church would have ever cared. But what happened was we do this thing called the Holiday Hangover, which is it's the Sunday right after Christmas, right? And so we film it, we pre-record it, and the idea is that volunteers, staff, everybody gets to stay home and we watch it online. And so what happened was we recorded. They were like, "Hey, you got a few songs that we could record for this holiday hangover?" And we're like, "Actually, we do. We've been writing together." And so we recorded these songs. It was all just supposed to be music video style. It was all supposed to just be for the holiday hangover. And then one of our executive pastors came up to us, I don't know, probably, I don't know, a couple of weeks before it was going to air. He's like, "Hey, what if we put this up on iTunes?" And we're like, "Can you do that? Is it just that easy?" And he did. He put it up on iTunes. And for one day, funny enough, I found the screenshot yesterday. For one day that it aired, it was the top album on the Christian charts on iTunes. It's called the Rooftop EP. But anyways, that's kind of what got us all started. We never set out to write songs for the world. We never set out to even record albums. We set out to write songs that we could agree on across our worship department, you know. And then we recorded an EP that was never supposed to be an EP. It was totally just for the holiday hangover. And then we did that the next year, and then the next year, and then gosh, probably by that third one, Sony Provident came calling, and we're like, "Hey, we'd like to talk." We're like, "Really? Okay." So that's kind of how it got started.
That's awesome. That is awesome. So you have obviously different, like you have multiple campuses now. And how do you guys decide who is writing songs for Red Rocks? And how do they get part of that process?
Yeah, so who's writing for Red Rocks? I mean, it has evolved. So there's a lot of worship pastors and churches on here that are starting this whole process. So like it is for sure evolved. It started with every worship leader on the team was in the rights. Everybody was, you know, and then we kind of started doing these things where it was like two or three would go over here and two or three would go over here. And it was a lot of people that really weren't songwriters or very fresh and green to writing songs. But over time, those who like found a gifting with it and a passion for it, a calling, I think that we've just kind of like stayed with it. And the others, they haven't. And that's okay. They have their own lanes within our church and within our actual worship department. And like I need them to do that. I need them to worry about the Ableton session. I need them to worry about planning center. I need them to worry about volunteer care, right? Like that's where they're really focused. That's what we need. And so what we've done then is we've taken, you know, the writers from our team of a couple core artists, core worship leaders on our team, and we write every Monday. And now, right now, because we're trying really hard to work on a new project, we're writing every Monday and Wednesday, and we are really selective on who we invite into those rooms because it matters. We care a lot about teaching our church through our songs, and so the language we use, we know the language we have to use for Red Rocks because we're very prodigal minded and very like new believer minded. We want it to be attainable and achievable for someone who maybe they didn't grow up in the church. So anyways, who we bring into those rooms is really important to us because, you know, we need them to understand who we're writing for. And so we've gotten to write with some people in Nashville. But it's really what I found to be successful is the people we find the best relationship with, the most relational equity with, the people that maybe we didn't even get the best song, but like I loved hanging out with them. Like those are the people we always go back to, and we invite them into the process. Because for me, and I think for Corey and our team, it's like the song is awesome. Of course, that's why we're writing. But at the end of the day, I think if we win the room, we win the day. Versus if we got the perfect song, but everybody had to fight for it and people are leaving kind of with their feelings hurt. You know what I'm saying? Like that doesn't really help anybody. It might be the coolest song ever, but I'd much rather win the room over.
It's so good. How has releasing music affected your team, like your local team?
Oof, we could go real deep, real hard on that one. I can't see everyone's faces. I can only see you three knuckleheads. So, well, here's the deal. At Red Rocks, one of our core values is authenticity. So I'm not gonna lie to you. I just want to share everything, but I'll share some. The truth is, I remember when we first started off, there was a big church in town, and one of the worship pastor from that church came in and spoke to our team. He had written some stuff and had released some music in the past, and he's like, "Hey, just want you to know that very soon you all won't be here. And I was like, what? Everybody on our team was like, what? What? He's like, yeah, it's just really hard. It's really hard. It's really hard to do this really well and to always be unified. And so then about 2 years later, yeah, we had some changes and some things just changed. He was completely right. So how it has affected our team, it has really brought, it has made our team have to be pure. It has made our team have to fight for unity. It has made our team have to seek the Lord. It has made our team have to have hard conversations with each other, time and time again. Me and Corey, he's my best friend for real. I think he'd tell you the same thing. We couldn't be further from, like, we just couldn't be more different. He's water and I'm fire. We always talk about that. But we lead this thing together and we write a lot of songs together. I trust him on the stage. I trust him off stage. I trust his character. But my goodness, we go to Starbucks, I feel like once or twice a month, and we call them our Starbucks dates because we go to Starbucks and we get work done. We just talk about, like, hey, dude, this is what I'm feeling. Hey, dude, this is what I'm feeling. Hey, you know what? This is what I perceived, and this could be completely wrong. But did you mean that? And those little moments at Starbucks, and it's always Starbucks, it's always 2 venti vanilla sweet cream cold brews. I can tell you exactly where we're going to sit. It's like, it's a thing. Brewster even knows about it. It's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
We as so long as we're honest and so long as we are humble, we always come out the other side winning, and we always come out the other side more unified. And I think there's a blessing on that. And then we're able to take that to our team. But I think when you start writing songs, you're writing songs, you should be writing songs to bless the Lord and to connect people with the Lord. That's it. That's really it. If you're in it for fame, good luck to you. It won't work. I did that for a minute and I missed the mark. I really, really did. It just hurt more than it ever helped. And I made a fool of myself, to be honest. It's hard to be a teammate when you're doing that. If you're in it to write the big song, good luck. Good luck to you. I don't know. I haven't figured that out just yet. But I know this, that if you're in it to bring people in your church to the Almighty God, the one who he's already given us the answer. He is the answer. If you do that and you do it with humility, you will not lose. I promise you that. But it requires a whole lot of humble pie, is what we talk about at Red Rocks Church all the time. I get really full on humble pie, and so does everybody else on our team. So it's caused us to, like, really work hard to be very tight and to keep the main thing.
So good. So good. Well, Ty, we know you got to get back to leading worship, and we appreciate you jumping in and taking some time out of your busy day. I know the guys are thankful, and I'm sure everyone listening is thankful. And if you can find out more about Ty, you can go to Red Rocks Worship on any social media platform. Yeah. And you will find Tyler there, and he is amazing. You're going to want to connect with him.
Hey, thank you all. Thank you guys for the opportunity. Love this. Love you people. You guys are awesome.
Hey, Ty.
Thanks, brother.
Yes.
Give them heaven, man.
Let's do it. That's what we're going to do here in Mishawaka, Indiana. Never thought on what day is a Friday I'd be in Mishawaka, Indiana, but God knows. God knows. We're here with Martin Smith, though, from Delirious. So it's got to be good. It's got to be good.
Awesome.
All right. Love you.
Thank you, brother.
Bye.
Awesome. Thank you, Ty. Man, what a great, it's just good to hear from someone who's kind of walked the road. He dropped some nuggets there, man. Like, just, especially the team piece of it. That I have to process that a little bit, and something good, I think, for people that are watching to think about is, there's a people cost, to weigh in, and, having that transparency, honest conversations, just being able to over communicate, doesn't mean that you're not going to hurt people's feelings, but man, it can help eliminate a lot of that. So just real quickly here at the end, we just got a few minutes left. I know there's been a few questions popping into the chat. You guys go ahead and drop in any questions that you might have, so things that might be that you're dealing with your church, things that might be specific to your church. We'll try to answer those. Let's try to keep them centered on either recording or music publishing, songwriting, those topics. And we'll answer a few of those questions. And then I know everybody's got different time schedules, but even when we shut down here in a few minutes, we'll leave the chat up. We'll just mute the microphones and the video, and we'll leave the chat up. If anybody still has questions, then maybe I can hang around for a little while, and we'll see if the guys can hang for a minute, and we'll try to answer some of those just via chat. But a couple of these that have come through, I want to throw out to you guys. So, someone in the audience today is a songwriter, but they're not really a performer. They want to get those songs to performers. Craig, from a music publishing standpoint, someone that's, I assume they're not in Nashville. They didn't say that, but if somebody's outside of Nashville, what's the best way for them to share those songs, get those songs heard?
Well, it's going to be difficult in a vacuum, and I think that's what they're feeling. I've always encouraged songwriters, if God's given you a gift to write songs, he's also given you a carrier for your gift. So, and a carrier would be an artist. So I think they need to start, or you, whoever you are, need to start praying for the voice, the carrier. And nothing good, and we've heard this common thread, nothing good happens outside of relationship. So you need to be praying for those relationships for people either at your church or in your community that can lend their voice, that need your song. Because if God's given you a great song, then there's a voice that needs your song.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to have to find them initially. You're not going to pitch that song through some kind of pitching service. You're not likely to get a publisher to listen to it and sign it. You have to find the person to help carry it. And I'm sorry if that's a discouraging way to say it, but I just trust the Holy Spirit in that there is, if you really have the gift and the song that needs to be heard, that there's a voice that needs to bring and carry that message.
Yeah. I think even utilizing social media as much as you can, even if you're not a performer, finding someone locally, maybe it's in your church, maybe you play and they sing, but just doing like sharing some video, putting it out on Instagram, putting it out on TikTok. And, man, it's been amazing. Like we've seen, like young artists, young songwriters that really have attracted audience. Craig mentioned it a while back, but consistent content is the key there. Like you can't just throw a song out and, all of your other posts are just pictures of your dog. It's like you've got to have, consistent. If you're going to be a songwriter, you want to be putting out, hey, challenge yourself. I'm going to put out a song a week. It's going to be New Song Friday, and I'm going to share a song with the world every Friday, And, but challenge yourself like that, and don't be afraid to put that music out there, in whatever format, doesn't have to be professionally done, but share your music. I think all of us would agree. Can't stress that enough. Share your music with people around you, with people that are your friends online, and there's nothing but good things that can come out of that. Steve, anything else to add there?
No. I mean, keep writing. Don't get discouraged. If you're meant to do this, God's going to bring that voice that Craig's talking about. So songwriting is as much exercise as it is creative. And so keep writing, keep working the muscles, keep getting better.
Craig, at what point, I'm gonna lump in ASCAP BMI with this too, but the question was specifically, at what point does a church need to register their songs with CCLI? Maybe answer the CCLI question first, and then maybe you could even hint or address the ASCAP and BMI. At what point do they affiliate with either ASCAP or BMI as a writer?
Yeah, I mean, again, we could go into great detail, but I'll just say it's easy and advisable to affiliate with a performing rights organization, ASCAP or BMI, early. Really what you want to do is have the writers affiliate first. And then if they happen to choose ASCAP and BMI, if you have two writers and one chooses ASCAP and one chooses BMI, you'll need a container or a publishing company for each of those performing rights organizations. So an ASCAP affiliated company that your church owns, and then of course a BMI company. That's easy, and it's really the time that to get your music to CCLI, to the other major church resource platforms, is when you feel you have either the opportunity or the possibility of others picking your songs for their worship services. And you may have a more of a positive view and say, hey, that could happen at any time, or you may wait for some evidence that this is happening. But it's really best when you're going to work with people like CCLI CCLI, Multitracks, Loop Community, Praise Charts, the major platforms you go to discover and access music. If you work through a known entity that has a relationship with them, but it's not impossible for you as an individual church to do that yourself. It's just some layers you have to go through. But as it relates specifically to PROs, it's easy to do it early, and you probably will want to affiliate early as writers and then with a church-owned publishing company. And then the next step would be CCLI. You can't affiliate directly, but it's great to have someone on your side pitching for you and advocating for your songs, because there's a lot of new music, obviously.
Yeah. Have you guys discovered, are there platforms or Christian resources? I mean, obviously both of you guys help people navigate these. Are there other potential platforms that help Christian music, just being able to kind of get it through some of these systems that you guys have discovered that have been helpful? That Stephen, you mentioned, DistroKit, that was really helpful. Just having, what are the options people are using to stream their songs? Any other resource that you guys have seen that's been helpful?
I mean, some people might say a scheduling service for social media. We've done a lot of testing, and when you use a scheduling service, your reach is definitely hindered from what an organic post might look like. But you could use like the internal system through Instagram or through Meta for Facebook and Instagram. But if you go to like a third-party system, it's going to affect what you're doing. So other than that, I don't know that there's when we think about like a program like a DistroKit or something like that, off the top of my head, I can't think of another one. Yeah. Craig probably.
And I would say there's just so many tools. There's such a wide toolkit you're going to end up using. And it's going to evolve over time. Like the first time you release music, you may not have lyrics up at Spotify and Apple, but then you'll find out, oh, I should subscribe to Music Match. And even at that, it may not go up immediately. And then you'll find out, oh, well, man, people really want our music and they want the lead sheet. So where am I going to go sell that lead sheet or have them access that lead sheet? Then you'll end up saying, well, I'm going to reach out to Praise Charts. I mean, it's great to think of all that on the front end, but it can evolve. I would not feel the pressure to get it all right day one, but I would definitely say we want to be obedient to what God has called us to do, and we're going to start in this direction. Whether you have the help of someone like Stephen or me, like just get started, but take some of the advice you get from today and take those baby steps and ask the right questions. And also make sure you've thought through a lot of these issues that can become conflicts later.
Yeah. So Stephen,
one thing really quick for sure you should do is once you've released your first song, go out and claim your 4 artist accounts at Spotify, Amazon, Apple, Pandora. You're going to want those because there's some marketing and some artistic control things that you can do through those platforms.
And don't you have to have the music released before you can go claim it?
Correct. If you're doing it independently, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, Stephen, so if you're, I'm putting myself in the place a lot of these churches are, or maybe they're individual artists, but, say you use DistroKit, you load your song up, it goes to the major streaming platforms. You wrote 100% of that song, say. If you check the right boxes when you're setting that up, all of that revenue will come back through DistroKit to you, correct? At that point, except for maybe the performance piece of that actually goes to ASCAP or BMI.
Correct.
Yeah. And so when we talk ASCAP BMI, this is, we don't get too far in the weeds on publishing, but you affiliate with one or the other. You don't need both. You, as a writer, you pick, they're very competitive. Both are great organizations. You would just pick one or the other, ascap.com, bmi.com. You can get information there, and we'll include that in a follow-up info sheet. We'll send you guys that has some links on that, but you would affiliate as a writer. And so that when your song is streamed, the mechanical piece of that stream comes back through your service that you loaded it up on. And so you don't have to do anything else. You don't have to do CCLI, anything. You'll get all of that money directly back through your streaming service or your platform that you loaded it up through. And then the other piece of it will come through an ASCAP or BMI statement. Those are going to be like micro pennies, y'all, like early on. I mean, it's very little. And so you got to really weigh how much time and effort, you put in to these things, because early on, you're really more than anything, you're not worried about making money. You're worried about building awareness You're worried about building, just letting people know what you're doing. Unless you have something that really blows up, then it becomes critical. You know, you want to reach out to someone like Craig or Stephen to help you navigate it when you start getting lots of emails and messages online of like, I'm singing your song this week. How can I get the charts? When that starts happening, you kind of know at that point, it's like, okay, I need to call in a partner here to kind of help me navigate this. But until you get there, loading it up, getting it out there, putting it out on YouTube, all of that can be done really simply, and without a whole lot of fuss.
Hey, let me give a quick qualifier. There are some situations where your church might be an anchor church in a movement or a denomination. I know that's not as common these days, but I have worked with churches or organizations where they're actually from day one called to be a resource to their sphere of influence. In that case, you might want to get it more established early because hey, we're pursuing a specific calling with a specific group of resources. But generally, it's exactly what Jimmy said. Watch the evidence, and if the evidence is there, then follow that and steward that well.
Yeah. Well, guys, first of all, I just want to say thank you to our guests, to Greg and Stephen. Thank you guys so much for sharing the time. Thank you guys for tuning in. And we're going to leave the chat open for a little bit. We'll disappear in a minute video wise and audio wise, but we're going to leave it open. If you still have questions, I'm going to get on. I'm going to try to bang back some answers to you guys and try to help you out. We're going to follow up with you. We'll send you a link to the video for today so that you can have that. We'll also put together a little bit of an info sheet. We'll put Craig's information on there, Stephen's. We'll put, links that are helpful to go and check out with Ask at BMI, read about CCLI and what they do and how they pay. So we'll put together a little bit of an info sheet to send you as well to hopefully help you along in your journey as your church figures this out. But the last thing I want to do, and maybe the most importantly, is I just want to pray over you guys and your plans and what God's put on your heart, that he would bless you in this. So let's take a minute and let me pray for you. Father, thank you for these churches, Lord. Thank you for music. God, thank you that you put on their hearts to write songs that glorify you, Lord. And we need more songs that tell of your greatness and how good you are. And God, would you give them a unique voice, and would they be able to express that first to their local church, to their local community, Lord? But we know maybe within a group like this, you also have plans to maybe use them to bless other churches, both here in the U.S. and around the world. And so, God, we thank you for that, Lord. We ask your blessing over that, Lord. I pray for all wisdom as these churches navigate this path, that they would be able to find the help that they need. I pray for their teams, Lord, that they would be healthy, that this would be a blessing to their teams, Lord, and it wouldn't be a hindrance to their local church at all, God, but you would use it to glorify the local church, to build a local church. And so, Lord, thank you for this time together, God. We give you all the glory and all the praise for it, and we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.